Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken Vikusic with this week's One Last Thing episode with co-host Slava Cooperstein. Slava, how are you doing?
I'm feeling great, Ken. You know, we kicked in the door and took all the 49ers presents, like the Grinch, as Zay Flowers illustrated for us. So feeling great.
Yeah, was a wonderful game in particular, and I think the topic for today is an interesting one, and it's what does this team have in common with the 2012 team, and in particular in terms of contributions by elements of the roster. I'm going to let you kind of introduce it, but tell us about what you had in mind.
Yeah, so when I think back to the 2012 Super Bowl winning Ravens. You and I have talked a number of times, and you've talked with a number of your other guests, how the 2012 Ravens were by far the most inferior of the first five John Harbaugh, Joe Flacco Ravens teams for any number of reasons. But they did what you really need to be able to do, which is get hot at the right time, peak at the right time. And, I think one of the reasons that they were able to do that is that they got key contributions from both very young, inexperienced players, as well as some key plays from their veterans down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. I mean, you could probably say that about almost any NFL team, but there was a lot of contribution on both ends of the barbell for that 2012 team. And I think we're probably seeing some of that in this team as well. Clearly, the Ravens have a lot of veteran talent. A lot of it priced very well, which is extremely unusual, folks, by the way, to get value out of free agency, to get real value over your cap cost of those players. Usually you fill a need, but you don't necessarily get value at those positions. I think the 2023 Ravens have been remarkable at that. But go back to the 2012 Ravens. How would you start that discussion in terms of making comparisons to the 23 team?
Yeah, so it's eerie, some of the similarities that you sort of have looking between the teams. Whether it was players filling in for injured Ravens or players coming back from injury. For instance, if you go back to 2012, in the offseason, Terrell Suggs tore his Achilles. I believe playing a game of pickup basketball, if I recall correctly. I also remember a lot of people wanting to, the Ravens to not pay him for, essentially doing something to keep in shape. Never understood that. But, Suggs came on and came back mid-season. And even though, he certainly wasn't the player that he was in his 2011 Defensive Player of the Year season, he was a key contributor down the line. And, you can, the first comparison that comes to mind for me is Marlon Humphrey being out the first quarter or so of the season, coming back, fighting through injury, and now, turning in his best effort of the season so far, I think by a wide margin, against the 49ers, a really quality opponent.
Outstanding game from Humphrey, no doubt about it. That 2012 Suggs season, if I recall, Suggs had 2 sacks that year or something for the entire season. I have to look this up because he got one in his first game back. I may have
against Houston. I was actually in Houston for that game.
Oh, you went to the game?
Yeah. My sister was living down in Houston at the time, so we figured we'd go watch that one.
Very cool. Played in 8 games that year, and I have his snap total here, but he only played 36.4% of the Ravens snaps, 392 during the regular season. It wasn't a good year. There's no way I can craft that into, polish it up to be a good year. But he did come back and he did provide something down the stretch. The Marlon Humphrey comparison is apt, but Marlon has been a much better player, much more significant to the 2023 Ravens, in my opinion. The 2 other guys who the Ravens lost that season were potentially much more serious losses. They lost Ray Lewis, who was their leader, along with, in the same game, Lardarius Webb, who was the best cornerback in the NFL at the point of his injury. He had dominated the 2011 season. There's always some residual love for players like Revis and whatnot around that time. But if you look at any measure of statistics, his passer rating against that year was 42. He had, in the postseason, he shut down Johnson of the Texans in the win there after the bye to get them to the AFC Championship. So it was an unbelievably bad loss. It's one of the ones you're in your seat, you're just screaming over when it happens, and it was the Ravens' biggest loss, as bad a loss as losing the Defensive Player of the Year was. To think that you could lose another defensive player that'd be an even bigger loss is really remarkable. The Ravens have been without Tyus Bowser this whole year. Maybe that's a reasonable comparison in terms of the flexibility he gives this defense. Now they've been able to scheme past that, obviously, and deal with these nice matchup zones, rotational coverages, whatever you want to call them, in terms of providing a challenge for opponents. But a similarly difficult player to lose.
Yeah, I mean, I have so much love for Webby. I mean, I remember just him, when he went down I think his rookie year, right as we were about to head into the playoffs against the Colts. I was like, oh, that's not looking good. That's not looking good for us, and it certainly wasn't. Now he was a gamer, and yeah, you hate to lose a guy like that, and we've certainly had our fair share of long-term injuries that we've been battling through, but have risen above admirably, I think.
Yeah, that Webb injury. The other guy, the 23 Ravens have lost. They've lost one of their huge playmakers, obviously, in Keaton Mitchell. Just an enormous loss that people, probably will look at and underrate because he was a rookie, but. I mean, they lost J.K. Dobbins. People thought that was a big loss, and it is a big loss. I mean, losing one of your big running backs in the first game of the year is a big deal, and the Ravens, penchant for replacing them with guys who are older and not as good had been hurtful. It had hurt the team's performance over the previous years. But the Keaton Mitchell, they actually had ready to go as soon as he came off IR, and expectations were fairly high for him. So that maybe even the Dobbins loss in a way didn't seem as bad at the time, but then to lose Mitchell, who has had, on a per snap basis, one of the most productive years in NFL history for a running back, it's just an awful loss. Yeah,
I mean, I think you've said everything that there is to say on that. It's truly. Deflating, and honestly, that losing Mitchell may be even more of an apt comparison to losing Webb than anything else. Just the magnitude of just the deflating feeling. I mean, you could see it on Harbaugh's face. Harbaugh's face basically said everything that we were feeling about that.
So that's a really good point, by the way. Is you don't often see Harbaugh show a lot of emotion on the sideline, and that clearly frustrated the hell out of him.
Yeah. It's just like, how many times is this going to happen? I want to go to just a point that you touched on earlier is that, yes, you absolutely can say for any team, it's like, okay, your young players and your old players are producing well. That's a recipe for success. Seems obvious, but usually your oldest veterans and your youngest players are sort of like can be your failure points. In a game, right? Young players, making boneheaded moves, and older players just not having the athleticism anymore, being injury prone or something like that, and to have all of those things hit at the same time is, I think, the rarity that 2012 was able to hit on that 2023 is starting to.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think, the failure point for young players is usually they're just not where you expect them to be in the development curve. They're not ready to be in the NFL in terms of their strength to play the game and whatnot. You thought they were more ready to play in the draft than they were. And the Ravens have got a whole series of players. And by the way, I'll plug the episode with Voss on Friday Morning GM from this week, because it's about the 2023 development of the players on their rookie deals, and it's highly germane to this exact discussion. But you have players who are all over the place in terms of where the team probably thought they were going to be. I can't tell you what John Harbaugh actually thought about Saleh coming into the OTAs when he put him in at left guard, whether that was just a motivational trick or it was a move where he really thought he'd found something in terms of a left guard. But he's a player who didn't work out. He's still in development. More is needed, I would say. There's other players the clock is running out on. I mean, if you look at a player like JAD, he'll be entering his third season next year. Had trouble staying on the field, but that's not even the problem, because when he has been on the field, he hasn't been that good. And that's been probably a more serious issue, is he can't seem to both find the football and track the receiver. It's too much, and it's something you have to be able to do as a corner. It's part of the job description. So there's a bunch of guys that fit in all the way along the spectrum, including players like Mitchell, who just even in the 47 carries he had and the receptions he had, made an enormous contribution to this 2023 season, and any number of other young players who've made some to a lot of contribution, including Travis Jones, for example, stepping forward with what I think has been a really big year.
For sure, yeah. It's very heartening to see some of these guys turning it on at the right time. So, like, let's talk about Travis Jones. Travis Jones has had a good year, certainly. But I think in the beginning maybe was a little more quiet than some of us had hoped. But he's I think one of your guests recently was saying he's earning more playing time, and that's really the way you want it to go, right? You want it. You don't necessarily want trial by fire. You want the guy to basically force the coaching staff's hand to say, you can't afford to take me off the field. That's how well I'm playing, right? Travis Jones is starting to really show himself to be that guy, and is coming on at the right time. So then, if you want to go and look at 2012, a guy that sort of started to turn it on right at the very end of the season, starting into the playoffs, was Bernard Pierce, who's backup running back to Ray Rice, and really provided a tremendous north-south, one cut kind of running spark for the Ravens, churning some of those tough yards, but also having some of that explosiveness. Really was almost like they had signed like a high quality free agent right at the end of the season.
Yeah, definitely. Pierce was second or third round draft pick. I don't recall actually which, but I think he might have been a 3 actually. But he was a guy who definitely brought something to that offense. A lot of people thought he was going to be an unbelievable player, and for running backs, it doesn't always work out. It's just things can go south in a hurry. So we have to look at that. I'm very fearful of what might be down the road for Mitchell in that respect. I'll give you another player from 2012 though, who took on a role because there was nobody else there to do it, and that's Albert McClellan. He went in and he started the season at right defensive end in place effectively of Suggs, but he actually started that first game. His listed position is RDE, not outside linebacker, RDE. He actually had his hand in the turf for some of that game. Yeah. And just he did things because there was no one else to do them. And if I were to take a player like that this year, I think he's a pretty good comp for Harrison in terms of what he's done. Harrison hasn't played as many snaps. And McClellan that year, by the way, played almost 38% of the snaps for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah,
hard to believe.
He stepped in for Ray Lewis, when Ray went down. And honestly, we all remember Ray's last ride. We remember the speeches. We remember the unbelievable goal line stand, which you've pointed out many times that, Ray contributed to every single down on that play. But 2012 really was, 2008 was the final year of the peak of Ray Lewis's powers. 2009, 10, and 11 were still very good years from Ray. 2012 was a down year. I think he saw the writing on the wall. So honestly, when McClellan stepped in, what he there really wasn't much of a drop off at all that I can recall. I mean, maybe the statistics bear something out, but I remember being very pleasantly surprised with McClellan, not just from athleticism comparison to Ray at that point, but also he was a pretty intelligent, heady player.
Yeah, that definitely describes Albert McClellan, whether he's playing special teams or moving around, playing inside linebacker, outside linebacker as needed in his time with the Ravens. But a prototypical kind of special teams plus defense contribution player that the Ravens really latch onto and keep on the roster for many years. If you think about Levine or Stone, really fell into that category until this year when he's got a lot more playing time. But it was a interesting team. They had Donnell Ellerbe and Jameel McLean had been platooning more or less at that weak side spot, and they had a very complex platoon back then. McLean would be a first down linebacker. Ellerbe would be like a second and long linebacker, and then they bring in a dime on third down in years prior to 2012. Well, in 2012, with Ray's injury, each of them had to do more. And so they each ended up playing a lot of snaps. And Ellerbe, of course, turned it on and got the game-winning pressure on fourth down in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, he also, I think, had, I'm trying to remember if it was 2012 or 2014 where Ellerbe had a pick of Tom Brady in the playoffs.
Oh, that was 12. That was 12.
Okay.
I think the ball deflected by McPhee, and he picked it off.
Yeah, and then because I remember Kerry Williams also had the game sealing. Actually, hey, there's a name for
There's
you.
a player.
Kerry Williams, Kerry freaking Williams. Yeah. Going in there. I mean, into a depleted secondary. Does that sound familiar? And refusing to let the quality of play in the secondary drop off. I mean, you could put any of our signees there. Kerry Williams, Corey Graham, right? Guys.
Corey Graham is the other one I was just going to mention. He was so critical to that Ravens team. And he was a bargain free agent, a guy that the Ravens went out and got, didn't have a ton of money to spend, but they went out and got a guy who certifiably helped them get to the Super Bowl with the way he abused Peyton Manning in that Mile High Miracle game.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you've got, this year you've got Ronald Darby and Rock Ya-Sin playing meaningful quality snaps, stepping in when needed and just doing a terrific job. I think those are a very apt comparison. And then if you want to stay with the defensive backfield, you've got Jimmy Smith in his second year in 2012, who played such a key role in the playoffs. Right, he had the incredible special open field special teams tackle of Trenton Holiday, who had already scored 2 touchdowns against us during the Mile High Miracle game. Just what a critical play, and then also just incredible coverage on that goal line stand in the Super Bowl, basically taking off Michael Crabtree's head.
2 plays in a row, right? Great coverage there. Yep.
Just outstanding physical play, and then so he sort of kind of ascended at that time, and who's shown out more than Brandon Stevens this year, right?
And that was a case again where Smith got injured on the first play of the year. I want to say, wait a minute, I'm thinking 11 or 12.
2011. It was the first play, special teams return when we stopped the Steelers.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the big downside from that game. Yeah. There are a lot of other veterans on that team who made a contribution. Some of them who've kind of left themselves with some dark spots, but 2 guys in particular that I'll talk about. Bernard Pollard, who had a very important play in the AFC Championship game. It just turned out that Bernard Pollard was playing in the wrong era of football, even in 2012. In 2023, he'd be suspended every other week. It's but for in 2012, he was still playing in the wrong era, but he delivered that one enormous knockout blow, literally to Ridley, that knocked the ball loose, and had a very tough Super Bowl. And unfortunately, he's one of the Ravens who's become distanced from the team since he left, with some of the comments he's made about the Ravens and the Ravens organization. How they didn't love him, didn't value him, yada yada.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's tough to value a guy who can't cover from the safety position. He got a ring for his efforts, and I certainly appreciate what he did while he was here. Hopefully, one day he'll come around, but definitely one of those sort of inexpensive veterans who came through in a key moment for us.
Another guy, a young guy who was in ascension at this point, definitely had not reached his zenith yet, was Pernell McPhee. Now, in 2014, he would be the driving force behind one of the greatest pass rushes in Ravens history. He could do anything he wanted on the interior, thunderous first step, beat double teams with such regularity. It's shocking. You could run all your stunts and around him as an under, and he was about as good as anybody has ever done it for the Ravens. Not really credited the way Dumervil and Suggs are for that season's high sack total, but he was really the man. He was really the man in the middle of that. And then the other guy on the defensive line, Arthur Jones, young player, still a standing 2010 draft pick in his third year. And both those guys went on to be, well-paid free agents in other cities. But during their rookie year, but during 2012, they caught the ascension wave at the right time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Art Jones, man, I loved him. He was a great player. Had some explosiveness and sort of in the pass rush, collapsing the pocket a little bit. That was a little bit unusual, kind of in the way. I don't know that they win the exact same way, but he'll surprise you in a similar way to Michael Pierce. It's like I don't expect a guy that size and shape to move, to move that way. But definitely fond memories of those guys.
Yeah, Syracuse guy. I remember one of the things is the Ravens had him black dotted on their draft board, and what that means is that they have him. Either he's got a character concern, which was definitely not the case with Arthur Jones, by the way. It was an injury concern in his case that had it, and he dropped far enough that the Ravens got him anyway in the 5th round. They liked him, but they ended up taking him. So it's a great story in his case of a guy coming back from, frankly, some draft adversity, because I think a lot of people thought he'd be drafted higher than that.
Yeah, a steal for us, and I think he went on to get a nice second contract from the Colts. Mm-hmm. Fond memories of that guy. I think one of the most obvious ones, one of the most obvious comparisons is Torrey Smith and Zay Flowers.
Sure.
They're not, they're both fast guys, but dissimilar in sort of the way that they operate in the field. Like Flowers is a much more sudden, joysticky athlete, whereas Torrey Smith just, beelines, 1,000 yards down the field, and Flacco, gets his DPI from the poor sap who's trying to cover him. But the similarity is that they both had incomplete toolboxes at this point in their careers. Torrey Smith in his second year, Flowers in his first. But we're both very productive receivers that earned the trust of their quarterback. And of course, Torrey Smith had one of the finest games of his career against the Broncos with future Hall of Famer Champ Bailey getting burned for 2 gigantic, tremendous touchdowns, and one of which was an incredible adjustment. I believe going right to left. On
the right sideline, coming back to the inside, right by the goal line.
Yeah. I mean, that adjustment, that mid-air adjustment, is one of the most athletic things I've ever seen a Ravens receiver do. You hope for that, story to play out in a similar way for Flowers, who really has earned the reps that he's gotten and really delivered. I mean, we have some gripes about maybe how he's being used and a couple other things, but he's shown to be, smart player, absent of a couple gaffes here and there, and pretty sure-handed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another good comparison from that team. The 2012 season was magical in a lot of ways. Sticking with 23 now for a moment, what's one of the really striking things is just how well DaCosta has managed a very limited free agent budget this year to get players like Clowney, Van Noy, who've all of a sudden given the Ravens not just a serviceable pass rush, which is probably what you'd hope for in that situation, but the best one in the entire league, arguably. Certainly lead the league in sacks at least. He went out and got 2 cornerbacks both for inexpensive price. And then the Ravens didn't find themselves wedded to which one was ahead of them on the depth chart. And they did at two different positions, because if you take Yassine and Darby, both contributed early on in the season, but both ended up behind Stevens, who was a safety to start the season. And they just said, we don't care who we're paying. This is the guy we're playing. And the other place where they did it is at slot corner, where they had Mollett had a fair amount of guaranteed money in his contract. It doesn't make a lot of money total, just vet minimum approximately. But he had $200,000 in guaranteed money, which didn't ensure that he wouldn't be cut, but it was pretty close to it. And then starting the season, Ardarius Washington has won the job. And they go with it. So it's been a very good job of folding in these veterans with youth and making the right decisions with the youth you have.
Yeah, inexpensive free agent acquisitions, outperforming their contracts. Above all else, Clowney and Van Noy, like you said, but certainly, Darby and Yassine being key contributors. I guess this is sort of a bigger difference between 23 and 2012 is that a lot of the veterans on the team happened to be second or in some cases even third contract guys who were just cornerstone extensions. This was around the time when Ozzie just could not miss in the first round of the draft. So you had, Ray, Ed, Suggs, Nada, but you had a guy like Bryant McKinney who was really not in the coaching staff didn't really favor him for
they benched him the whole year.
yeah. He had some attitude issues, but the team, players revolted a little bit and said, we need McKinney on this line. And there's a guy who definitely ended up outperforming his contract in that Super Bowl run. He, went to the left and allowed Michael Orr to go back to the right side.
Yeah, I mean, that three-way switcheroo on the offensive line is something I don't think we'll ever see again. I don't think it's likely we'll see something like that ever again. But Michael Orr really needed to get some better advice, probably from his agent, or some better advice from players, from people around him who maybe didn't have the same financial interest, or maybe that did have a financial interest that he would trust, and say, left tackle, you may not be the ideal guy for that spot. And at right tackle, he appeared to be a borderline Hall of Fame player in his rookie year. A guy who starts at the kind of level he played at, where he's enormously good as a right tackle, really bad as a left tackle, even in his first year. And then it got worse when he decided, I just have to have that spot from Gaither in his second year. And Gaither got upset about it and developed a back injury. And I'm using air quotes because Gaither would basically jump down any well if he thought it would spite somebody else to, or cut off his own nose. You understand the metaphor I'm saying here, but
yeah.
It was an unbelievable three-way switcheroo. And the guy who probably benefited the most was Osemele at guard.
Well, I also think he's the guy we benefited from the most.
That's what I mean.
He was just a revelation in the Super Bowl. I mean, just dominant against that incredible 49ers defensive line, and really, really just an all-time performance. But yeah, it is a tremendous thing to be able to change three spots on your offensive line and just have everything hold together. Certainly having Matt Burke at center and having Marshall Yanda at right guard doesn't hurt. But yeah, not likely to see something like that again.
The Matt Burke one is a good one to like probe a little deeper on, though, because they went out and they got Matt Burke and let
Jason Brown.
Yeah, Jason Brown. They let Jason Brown go. And Jason Brown signed for 5 years, $37.5 million, if I recall correctly, with the Rams.
Yeah.
And then Burke came in, and it was like 3 years, $12 million he signed with the Ravens. So he signed for, roughly half, and he was a 6-time Pro Bowler. It came to just people have real hesitation at signing offensive linemen to multi-year deals in their 30s. And Burke ended up being one of the greatest linemen in Ravens history to play his position. I think, if you're looking at who was the greatest center in Ravens history, I don't really think there's a question. If you're thinking about who was the greatest lineman for his position, he's right there in the discussion. Jonathan Ogden would be number 1, but after that, Marshall Yanda is number 2, and then Matt Burke on a per snap basis is really in the discussion, even with those two guys. But he's certainly in the discussion with a lot of other players. The Ravens have had a hell of a lot of great offensive linemen in their history.
Yeah, and Burke was part of a fun storyline. He got a little bit of personal redemption against the Patriots. Trying to think who I can't think of his name. The gigantic,
Will Fork?
Yeah, Will Fork. Will Fork really gave it to Burke in the 2011 AFC Championship game, and so that was a point of some concern. Don't get me wrong. When we beat the Broncos, I said we're going to the Super Bowl. Like there's no question in my mind. But Burke did have a personal redemption game and played very well against Will Fork in that AFC Championship game. And just what a pickup for a guy in his late career. Yeah.
I did want to mention this one thing, because this is a common misconception about Will Fork. Will Fork nose tackle for his career, but in the 2009 AFC wildcard game, where the Ravens went in and kicked the teeth out of the Patriots, they only passed the ball 10 times, ran it 52 and won 33-19. It was every bit as dominating a performance as what they just did to the 49ers, and similar in a lot of ways, because it was all turnover laden and
yep.
the very similar game in a lot of ways. And the Ravens, the big difference was the Ravens passed the ball all night on Monday night. They ran the ball all freezing day on that wild card game against the Patriots. But Will Fork started the game and was doubled up on Ray's 83-yard run and Ray Rice's. And the great thing about that was they panned to the sidelines, and Will Fork is explaining the play in like physical terms. You can tell him exactly what he's saying in terms of, I was double teamed, I got pushed out of there, and this and that happened. Anyway, he moved because of injury. He had to play effectively like a 5-tech role, I want to say, because the guy who got him for the whole game and just destroyed him in that game is Jared Gaither. And people say, wait a minute, Gaither's a nose tackle. No, Jared Gaither was in there blocking Will Fork for a lot of that game and did a really great job. So it's one of those cool things. And whatever Will Fork did to the Ravens at later times, and you're right about the 2011 game, I think about that game and the fond memories of Will Fork really being used like a sock puppet, in that game.
Yeah, another good moment was when Justin Tucker hit the game-winning field goal when they still had the replacement refs, and you could see Will Fork with his helmet off, just screaming, saying, like, no, that field goal wasn't good. But they got us sometimes, we got them sometimes. Mm-hmm. I think one of the last comparisons I wanted to make for the veterans is Anquan Bolden and OBJ. People remember Bolden in particular for his heroics during the 2012 playoff run, and rightfully so. But he didn't have much of a he didn't have a tremendous statistical season during the regular season. He scored about 4 touchdowns during the regular season, and just was not, it wasn't, he wasn't a top flight number 1 receiver all season. And for different reasons than, what we've gotten out of OBJ. I mean, OBJ definitely has less in the tank than Bolden had at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he has, I think, outperformed, your expectations and mine. And, at the end of the day, what you hope for is that OBJ continues to be who he's been these past couple of years, and is a guy who shines brightest when the lights are brightest shining on him, right? And it comes through in key catches in the playoffs. And that's kind of who he's been sort of throughout the season, and sort of some of the biggest moments in primetime games coming through. So hopefully that will be an apt comparison.
just in terms of that 2012 season for Bolden to frame this up, and honestly, he's been a much greater player than OBJ is, and we hope OBJ can provide something down the road. But 921 yards during the regular season, he was there for pretty much the whole thing. Did he play every game? He played 15 games, not 16, but he played 15. He had 65 catches, so 4 touchdowns. Yeah, that's a little disappointing, but 921 yards. He's part of the offense the whole year. But in the playoffs, 10.6 yards per target on 36 targets, so 380 yards in 4 playoff games with 4 more touchdowns, was where the Bolden Baltimore legend was really made, as you indicated there before. And that's why people were so frustrated, I think, that the Ravens really found themselves in a position where they had to cut him after that season. Yes, they got a salvage of a 6th-round draft pick, but that was because they had to cut him. Yeah,
no, it definitely was painful to look back on, because he was the engine of that offense. Sort of he kept things churning on 3rd down, and some of those high leverage downs. He was just a clutch player with outstanding hands and outstanding instincts. And you just hope that whenever OBJ's Ravens career ends, we have some similarly fond memories to think of.
Yeah, there you go. And given the things, I'd point to the GM show this week, but we talk a lot about the cap hit. But there is a big additional cap constraint going to be put on the Ravens, which makes it even less likely they're going to be able to sign a lot of the free agents that are out there right now. It's the NLTBE bonuses. Beckham earned a portion of one, but Brian McFarland published that he thought there were in the neighborhood of 8 or 9 million of these to be taken out of what is a already constrained cap by lower revenues than expected. So you put those two things together, and the teams that get hosed by that are the teams that are on the margin in terms of cap. If you have 70, 80 million of cap right now, and the cap goes down by 10 million for everybody in the league, you're doing cartwheels. Yeah. Because you are relatively much more wealthy than the other teams. If you're right at the cap and you're now 10 million under, you got to find out who you cut or how you push money forward, or how you make extensive use of the credit card to keep your team together. It's a very difficult situation to be in.
Yeah, no question. This is just like this was sort of. In 2012, you had a number of players hanging on for their, last ride with the team. I would say mostly by age. 2023, you're sort of similarly looking at a bunch of players and saying, like, this is our last best chance to do this together, and hopefully it pans out.
Yeah, and it's not dissimilar in a way that the second contract for the quarterback loomed over the year in both cases. In this year, we're in it with Lamar already. In that year, they didn't have the cap space to sign Flacco, so that was a more serious problem. So they knew the team was going to get broken up at the end of the year. Players like Ellerbe and Bolden and Burke and whatnot knew they were going to have to be gone at the end of the year. And they had to figure out how to sign Joe Flacco. That was their primary thing during the offseason. And both years, both in the Flacco year and in the Jackson year, not having clarity around that situation kind of made it difficult for the Ravens to make plans.
Yeah, it's certainly easier to accomplish what you want to accomplish on a rookie quarterback deal, but at least we've got that behind us and in the rear view, and now we're at least the uncertainty part of it, and but that brings its own problems. But that's a problem for another day, Ken. In the meantime, I'm enjoying the wins. I'm enjoying stealing Christmas presents, and excited to see where this ride takes us. Me too. There's always a worrying component of every fan, but believe me, I'm the same way as you. When I go to a game, I want to see them win. I want to see them grind out first downs. I want to see them choke the life out of the opponent on a play-by-play basis. But I'm not thinking nearly as much about salary cap implications for 2024 as I do when I get back to this chair here in my office. Yeah, hard to think about anything else when you're kicking everyone's teeth in, and hopefully that continues this Sunday against what some people have termed the most important regular season game in Baltimore Ravens history.
Do I agree with that? That's an interesting claim. So what would be the most important games otherwise? I'm not sure that the team had a 2000 game that was as important. So how they're really defining this is saying that it's important in the fact that we knew it was important going in, not like what it eventually became to the team. Because like that 2000 Jacksonville game, people could point to and say, that was more important. Okay, so it was that important going in. It's an interesting claim.
It's up there. The thing that came to mind was some of those late season games in maybe like 2008 and 2010 against the Steelers, because I think that had we won some of those late season games, we would have been hosting, and just thinking about how razor thin the margins were in some of those games, that could have been the difference between us going to the Super Bowl versus not. But it's hard to top guaranteed first round bye. Mm-hmm. So either way, stakes are high, and I'm looking forward to seeing us rise to the occasion.
Very cool. All right, my friend. Always great doing this show with you. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online or contact you.
I'm on Twitter at Slava Cooperstein. That's SLAVAKUPERSTEIN.
Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I'll get back to you very quickly. Recording one fairly shortly here. Other folks, if you don't want to be on a short, but you'd like to do something nice for the show, we got two avenues for you. One is write us a nice 50-word 5-star review on your favorite podcast channel. We'd always appreciate that. The other possibility is going out and showing this to somebody who doesn't maybe listen to podcasts normally or isn't aware of Film Study, and you'd like to share that with them. And what I often find is, particularly with an older person, actually showing them how to play the thing off the website may be easier than trying to get them attuned to podcasts. And then if they like the content, maybe that's something that's worth learning how to download podcasts. But it's something it is out there and available that way. For Slava Cooperstein, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next week on One Last Thing.